100 yen, about 70 American cents. That is the asking price for a house in Uozu, a city on the Japan Sea coast, in a program the city runs to find someone, anyone, willing to take the place on. The house is not a ruin. It is habitable. It has a roof, a kitchen, a garden. You have been told your whole life that a house is the safest thing a person can own, that it goes up, that it is the thing you leave behind. In Japan, that stopped being true, and it did not stop by accident. It was built that way in a tax table, in a building code, and in the way a bank fills in a form. Japanese house prices peaked in 1991. 34 years later, they are still below that peak. Not the growth rate, the price. Over the same stretch, American house prices multiplied by more than 4. So here's what you're going to see. And here is the question that stays open until the end. First, the how. A house does not become worthless because the wood rots. It becomes worthless because a number in a government table says it has. You will see that table, the year it was written, and the exact moment it stopped being a tax rule and started being a market price. Then the why, and the why is the uncomfortable one. Japan is not a poor country. Its income per person is higher today than it was at the peak of the bubble. It builds some of the best engineered buildings on Earth. It has not lost the ability to make a house that lasts. It has decided, in effect, that it does not need to. And here is the part almost nobody says out loud, because it ruins the moral of the story. The country that destroys the value of its own houses is also the rich country where ordinary people can still afford one. Those are not two facts. They're the same fact, seen from opposite ends. Start with the table, because everything else follows from it. Japan's National Tax Agency publishes a list of how long things last, not how long they physically last. How long the tax code says you may write them down over. It covers machinery, vehicles, equipment, and buildings. For a wooden house used as a residence, the number is 22 years. For light gauge steel, 19. For reinforced concrete, 47. Understand what that number is for. It exists so a landlord knows how much of a building he may deduct each year. It is an accounting instrument. It says nothing about whether a house is still standing, still warm, still safe. Now watch what happens when it leaves the tax office. A Japanese property is valued as two separate things, the land and the structure sitting on it. The land is appraised on its own. The building is carried on the depreciation schedule. And when a wooden house passes 22 years, the schedule has written its value down to almost nothing. So the appraiser prices the land. The bank lends against the land. The buyer pays for the land. And the house on top of it, the roof, the kitchen, the garden, is treated as something between zero and a liability because clearing it costs money. Nobody ever passed a law saying a 23-year-old house is worthless. A tax table said it for a completely different purpose, and everyone downstream believed it. Meet the man on the other end of that table. He is in his 80s. He lives in Uozu, in Toyama Prefecture, on the coast facing the Japan Sea. He raised his children in the house. It is the ordinary Japanese suburban house. Timber frame, tiled roof, a small garden, a room where the family ate. Understand his position, because it is not the one you would guess. He is not trying to sell high. He is not holding out for a better offer. He cannot give it away. The building is past its statutory life, so on paper it is worth nothing. It sits on land in a shrinking coastal city, so the land is worth little. And if he demolishes it, he pays for the demolition himself. And then the tax on the empty plot goes up, which is a mechanism we will come back to, because it is the strangest part of this whole story. So the city puts his house in a program and prices it at 100 yen. In an interview with the Asahi Shimbun, published in October 2024, he says it plainly, quote, "I raise my children here, so I feel a twinge of sadness if I have to tear it down. If there are people who are happy to use it, I'd love to offer it even for 100 yen. End quote. That is not a man who made a bad investment. That is a man who did everything right for 50 years. Nobody designed this in one go. It was assembled one reasonable decision at a time, and each decision created the problem the next one had to solve. Step 1. The post-war rebuild. Japan has to house a country that was burned down, and then house a boom on top of it. The priority is volume and speed, not a house that outlives its owner. A large part of the standing stock gets built fast, and the expectation that a house is temporary is set early by the houses themselves. Step 2. The 1st of June, 1981. Japan brings in a new seismic standard, Shin Taishin, after the Miyagi earthquake. It is a serious upgrade. Buildings must survive a far larger shake without collapsing. And it works. When the Kobe earthquake hits in 1995, 0.3% of buildings under the new standard are seriously damaged, against 8.4% of the older ones. But look at what the same line does to the housing stock. From that date on, every house in the country is on one side of it or the other. A building put up before June 1981 is not merely older. It is a different legal category, harder to insure, harder to lend against, easier to write off. One line, drawn for safety, and half the country's houses fall behind it. Step 3. 1991. The bubble bursts. And here's why that matters more in Japan than anywhere else. In this system, the land was the part that held the value. The official nationwide land price index peaks in September 1991 and then falls for years. By 2003, a Cabinet Office white paper puts land prices at about 55% of the peak. So the building was already written down to nothing by the tax table. And now the land, the only part that was supposed to hold value, has halved. Step 4. The 1st of June, 2000. Another revision, this one aimed at wooden houses specifically after Kobe exposed what the older timber construction did in a real earthquake. Better houses again, and another line, and another vintage of homes on the wrong side of it. Step 5. The people. Japan's population peaks in 2010 at 128 million. By 2024, it is 124 million, and the decline is not evenly spread. It falls hardest in exactly the small coastal cities where the cheapest houses are. Fewer buyers in the places with the most houses. Each step is defensible. Several of them saved lives. Together, they built a machine that turns a family home into a cost. Now stand in it yourself. You own a wooden house in a Japanese suburb. You bought it new. It is 25 years old, which is to say it is 3 years past the number in the table. Structurally, it is fine. The roof is sound. You have maintained it. You want to move closer to your daughter. Option 1. Sell it as a house. Except the market you're selling into barely exists. In 2018, existing homes were about 14.5% of Japanese housing transactions. In the United States, the figure is 81%. In England, almost 86%. You're not selling into a weak market for second-hand houses. You are selling into a country that does not really have one. Option 2. Demolish it and sell the land. Now you are paying in cash to remove your own home so that a stranger can build a new one on the plot, and the new one will start its own 22-year clock the day it is finished. Option 3. Do nothing. Leave it standing. Lock the door. And this is the option the tax code quietly rewards, which is why 9 million of them exist. Notice what is missing from all three. At no point does anyone say the house is bad. It works. It is warm. It is safe. It keeps the rain out. The thing that has expired is not the building. It is the paperwork. This is the first chart in this video, and it is here because the scale of it is the part that words keep making sound smaller than it is. 3 countries, 1 index, 1970 to today. Britain, the United States, Japan. Watch Japan climb with the others through the 70s and 80s, and then watch what happens after 1991. Japan's house price index peaks at 174 in 1991. It falls for 18 years, bottoming at 94 in 2009, a 46% decline. It has recovered since. It is at 138 today, which means that 34 years after the peak, Japanese house prices are still about a fifth below where they were. In the same window, the American index went up more than 4 times over, and the British index more than 5. And here is a side note that tells you the market has drawn the obvious conclusion. In the financial year just ended, Japan started 740,000 new dwellings. That is down 6.5% on the year before, a third consecutive annual decline, and by one count the lowest in 61 years. A country with 9 million empty houses is still building, just less every year, in a market that has finally started to notice. Now, the part that turns this from a sad story into an infuriating one. Ask the obvious question. If an empty house is worth nothing and costs money to keep, why does anyone keep one? Why are there 9 million of them, instead of 9 million cleared plots? Because of a property tax rule, and it is almost perfectly designed to produce exactly what Japan got. Land with a home standing on it qualifies for a residential land tax break. For a plot up to 200 square meters, the taxable base is cut to 1/6 of the assessed value. Above that, 1/3. Knock the house down, and the land stops being residential land with a house on it. The break disappears. The tax bill on that same piece of ground can jump several times over, reported at roughly 4 to 6 times. So put yourself back in the shoes of the man in Uozu. Demolishing his house costs him money up front. It then raises his annual tax bill for as long as he owns the plot. And it gains him nothing because there is no buyer. Leaving it standing is free, and the roof holding up keeps his tax bill at 1/6. Every rational owner makes the same choice 9 million times, and nobody intended it. That tax break exists to keep property tax off ordinary families' homes. One of the least controversial ideas in any tax system on earth. It just never occurred to anyone that it would also be a subsidy for abandonment. So where is the mistake? And whose is it? Not the owner's. You maintain a house for 50 years and it still went to zero. Not the tax office's, exactly. Its job was to publish a depreciation schedule, and a depreciation schedule is a perfectly ordinary thing for a tax authority to publish. Every country has one. The mistake is that a number written for one purpose was adopted without anybody deciding to, for a completely different one. There is no Japanese law that says a house has no value after 22 years. There's a tax table that says you may write it off over 22 years. And then there are appraisers who use the schedule because it is the standard reference, and banks that lend against the appraisal, and buyers who see the appraisal and price accordingly, and builders who build to the standard the market rewards, which is cheap because the market has priced in that the building is going to zero anyway. Follow that loop around once more, and you will see it feeds itself. The building is assumed to be temporary, so it is built to be temporary, which proves the assumption. Nobody in that chain is doing anything wrong. Each of them is using the best reference available to them, and the reference was never meant to answer the question they're asking it. October 2023. Japan runs the survey it runs every 5 years. The Housing and Land Survey, conducted by the Statistics Bureau, counting the country's dwellings one by one. The result comes back in 2024. 9,002,000 homes are empty. Out of a total housing stock of 65 million, that is 13.8%. Both numbers are records. Sit with the scale of that for a second. 13.8% is not a rounding error in a housing market. It is roughly 1 house in 7 standing, locked, and not lived in. 30 years earlier, in 1993, the figure was 4.5 million. It has doubled, and it is not a crash. This is not a country where a bank failed and people walked away from their homes. Nothing dramatic happened at all. Every one of those 9 million houses is the completely rational, individually correct decision of an ordinary owner, doing arithmetic that the state accidentally set up for him. 9 million times in a country where almost everyone follows the rules. Here is the chart of what it did to value in real terms. And here is where the obvious conclusion is wrong. Because everything you have just heard sounds like a failure, and a lot of it is not. Start with the buildings themselves. The claim that a Japanese house falls apart in 30 years is not true. The average demolished dwelling in Japan is around 30 years old. The ministry's own estimates put it between 27 and 32, against 66.6 years in the United States and 80.6 in the UK. But that measures when houses get knocked down, not when they stop working. Academic work using survival curves puts the half-life of a standing Japanese wooden house at more like 56 to 63 years. The houses are not dying. They're being killed, on paper, decades early. And now the part that should make anyone comfortable with the moral of this story uncomfortable. Ask what a housing market looks like when the buildings do not appreciate. Housing in Japan is cheap. Rent is affordable in the largest city on earth. Young people are not priced out of the market by their parents' generation because their parents' generation is not sitting on an asset that quadrupled. Nobody in Japan is frozen in a house they have outgrown because they cannot give up a mortgage rate. In the countries where houses did quadruple, all of those problems are the defining political fact of a generation. So which of the two is broken? Japan has given up close to 30% of the real value of its housing stock, and it gets affordability. The English-speaking world protects that value and gets a generation that cannot buy in. Nobody chose either arrangement. Both of them fell out of tax code. Back to the question left open at the start. Why would a rich, careful, well-engineered country decide its houses should expire? It did not decide. That is the whole answer, and it is worse than a decision would have been. A tax authority published a depreciation table. A parliament raised the earthquake standard twice and was right to. A finance ministry gave families a tax break on the land under their homes. Not one of those is a bad idea. Put them in the same country for 50 years, and they compound into a machine that takes a maintained family house and prices it at 70 cents. Japan has started pushing back. The Vacant Houses Special Measures Act came into force in 2015, letting municipalities strip the tax break from derelict properties. An amendment took effect on the 13th of December, 2023, widening it to houses that are merely badly maintained, catching them before they become ruins. It is a real fix aimed at a real mechanism. It is also arriving 30 years and 9 million houses late. So the next time somebody tells you that property is the one asset that always holds its value, remember that this is not a law of nature. It is a choice about how you write your rules, and Japan is the country that ran the other experiment. Its houses are worth less. Its children can afford one.